All right, how's it going, friends? Welcome to another uh, episode, moment, program, space. I call it accidental, intentional space, called Tertuliando en Cuarentena. For those who haven't been, who haven't experienced it, who have not seen it, is basically Tertuliando en Cuarentena in Spanish means gathering, conversing, sharing space in this time of quarantine. So I've had I have been doing this now for the last 4 to 5 months, and a whole plural array of different personalities and different faces and different people that I find are super interesting, engaging in conversation with because from their each and every one of them from their areas they are doing something that in some way whatsoever it's challenging towards the status quo. Is a bit of a nonconformist attitude to live towards life. And tonight, I have a good friend of mine who we go way, 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 way back towards when I was a little angel, not the wing kind, but when I was younger. And anyhow, without any further ado, let me bring her on board. I believe she's joining us from the West Coast. We're in different time zones right now. So let's see. Let me hit the magic button. Hola.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us, Sammy. So,
Thanks for having
um,
me.
I find it a bit surreal that even though I've been doing this for so long, and the whole magic of being able to see people, and I haven't seen many faces other than the faces I've been seeing now for the last 5 months, but to see you and also to recollect the memories I have of us sharing in elementary school together
Mhm.
in fourth and fifth grade, if I'm not mistaken. I
Yeah.
mean, it is a bit surreal. It is a bit surreal, and I'm fond to that memory, and I'm glad that you're joining us in Tertuliando. So
Yeah, it's pretty
welcome.
crazy. Who would have thought? Right.
Sí, sí, sí. So gracias. Thank you for being here. And I like to kick things off talking about the current context and
Mhm.
talking about the pandemic situation, how things have been, how things are, and how have things been for you? I don't know if you began this where you are living at right now, but
Mhm.
how has it been? What were you doing? Uh, how has this shift been for you, for your partner, for
Yeah.
your companion, animal friends that share life with you there too? And
Mhm.
I also want to know maybe what are your observations towards society? What do you think this pandemic has brought to the surface as far as society? Maybe just specifically within the context that you're in.
Wow. Good questions.
I know, right?
Well, okay, so let me try to remember and break it down. So we started, we're in Portland, Oregon. And of course, like I started kind of hearing the about COVID like about a month before quarantine, probably not knowing that it was going to turn into this. Obviously, I don't think anybody did. And then beforehand, I was working for a family just as a nanny, and I helped them out at home. And now I'm on unemployment because, and I'm still talking to them, and I'm actually helping them with a design project now. But it just didn't feel they're like kind of around a bunch of people, and also like the kids were figuring out school stuff, and it just didn't feel comfortable for anybody. I think to be like around more people than they needed to be, kind of thing. So we just have been home. I've been working in the garden. Um, and it's funny, I feel like and I've been taking some classes for my design degree. And I feel like this has just been a huge roller coaster. Like at first, I felt really good in general. Like I felt like, oh my God, not that, yay, there's a pandemic and people are dying, but like in my own little bubble, like I've got time for myself. I've got time to think about the things that I've been wanting to think about. I've got time to do the things that I've been wanting to do. Really focus. Like, when is the last time that I was able to really have time to just completely focus on the things that I wanted to focus on? And so I was kind of excited about having that opportunity. Um, and now and so I decided to only take one class this summer and focus on like doing other things like in the garden and everything, but the garden kind of just is now at a place of like just maintenance. So it's not taking up a lot of my time. And now I only have one class. So that kind of like spun me for a little bit of a loop, because then I just had too much time on my hands. And I was like, well, now I'm sad and thinking about all these things, and spiraling in like the opposite direction. And like, how long am I going to be here? And when can I hug my friends again? And when can I see my mom? And like freaking out about it in like just a totally different way. Um, and so I loaded my schedule for classes in the fall, with like 6 classes. And I also signed up for a teaching English abroad course, TEFL course.
Oh,
So that
nice.
I can either like teach English online if I need to, which is, something that I think about, because I don't necessarily want to go out into the world, into the workforce quite
Hmm.
yet. I don't feel comfortable with that. Um, and also, if I like happen to live in another country one day, I can use that as a skill. So that's been filling up some more of my time and leveling me out a little bit. But yeah, I definitely have my moments. And my husband's home too. He happened to work from home anyway. Um, and we have our moments, sometimes we're like really having a great time, and then other times we're not.
Yeah.
And I think anybody living with their partner probably experiences the same thing. And then my cats, I mean, they're stoked, although on the times that we do happen to leave the house for whatever reason, they don't seem like they even noticed, although this guy's about to fall off the bed. Um, but it's been really nice having them. And like I was saying to you earlier, just like kind of being able, it's right now, I think it's really easy to spiral and to think about like all of the horrible, sad things that are going on in this world, and the unfairness of so much. And then you kind of have these little animals around you that, their lives are just as complete as ours. And
Yeah.
um, it gives you a different perspective. And it also gives you an appreciation for the beauty that is the world and life.
And I think that during these times where we have to find ourselves with ourselves, in ourselves, or at least that we have more time um, to make it harder to ignore ourselves, because we're finding you know in the placement of four walls, and of course not living in a bubble, meaning like we don't live in a vacuum. There's stuff that's going on, and we are becoming aware of stuff that's going on, and maybe even more aware even more aware now of stuff that we have probably ignored for so long, but now it
100%.
makes it even more inevitable. We do need to have moments of intentional or accidental reflection. And I think talking about the importance of being in companionship, I think it was, I don't know if you've seen the movie Into the Wild.
Yeah. The one about
Um,
the Jack.
Living in Alaska
Yes,
in the
yes,
bus. And
yes.
then one of his last thoughts. I mean, he was definitely flirting a lot with Leo Tolstoy and all these great thinkers. And he said something like in the lines of, happiness is only really experienced when shared.
Mhm.
And there is something about being in community, being communion, and that involves not only human to human, in my opinion, that involves human to nature, because it's
Yes.
sorry to sound redundant, but it's natural that it works that way. And when you talk about your, like, we're talking backstage, and you were telling me about your cats, and I was telling you I'm a big sucker for cats ever since I adopted 2 cats some years ago back in Germany. There's just something when we talk specifically about cats, that there's just this kind of like this sense of mystery in this realm that happens, that that waved connection that is constantly flowing between you and them and you.
Mhm.
And during these times, I think it could be a very re-energizing experience to have that comfort with
Mhm.
along us.
Yeah.
So a question I like to ask my guests, in a manner where I can kind of like walk through a little bit of their lives, and then so people who are watching also can hear a little bit about them, is to ask three or more experiences, but at least three experiences that you gather have been formative, have been cathartic in your life, throughout your life. Experiences of extreme joy, of extreme sadness, of even maybe trauma, but things that have happened in your life that you reckon have, when you look back on them, you're like, yeah, this definitely was. I mean, this was a fork in the road, or it could have been an instance, a specific thing. It could be a process of months, of season in your life.
Yeah.
So if you could share like at least three experiences in that character, um, feel
Yeah.
free to do so.
Well, the first experience that immediately comes to mind is a more recent experience, which was losing my dad. He died a year and a half ago, about. Um, and it was expected. He had been sick for a while, and I often think like about the difference between expecting somebody to die, or know that it's coming soon, or like it happening suddenly, and the pluses and minuses of both. And although it was hard to see him deteriorate, because he had pulmonary fibrosis, which is the scarring of your lungs, and it just keeps getting hard until you can't breathe anymore, basically. Um, but I knew when he was at the end, I got to go say goodbye to him and spend time with him. And I feel really grateful that I had that awareness, even though it was hard leading up to it. You know what I mean? And also just the complexity of grief is such a insane thing that I've never experienced before, because you think about it, and you think about like a parent dying or anybody dying and that you're close to, and you think like, every case is different, obviously, but for me, I'm like, oh my God, my dad is going to die, and it's going to be awful, and I'm going to be miserable for the rest of my life, just like going down this hole of like despair thinking about it. But really, like, there are oddly positives that come out of it too. I mean, of course, when your loved one is in pain, it's good that they're not in pain anymore. But like, I remember just feeling this immediate loss of fear from my own death. And like, I still, like, I don't want to die, and I don't want to die from COVID. I don't want to die in a terrible, awful way, but I'm not nearly as afraid of death, of dying. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
Yes, yes, it does.
And also it just like kind of kicked me in the butt to just like start living my life and doing things that I'd been putting off. And I think part of the reason why I was putting them off was because I was always afraid of, for one reason or another, not being around when I did need to be there for my dad. So it was a little, it's a relief in some ways. And I don't think I expected to be relieved for his pain being gone, but I didn't expect to be relieved of like my own. Okay, so another thing, sorry, I feel like I'm all over the place,
You're good. You're good.
is that I've always been like a worrier, and
Hmm.
I always catastrophize. Is that how you say it?
I know,
And
but it makes sense. I understand what you mean.
yeah, and I feel like one of the biggest things I worried about was my parents.
Hmm.
Are my parents, and I just always thought about like being afraid of when they die. When are they going to
Yeah.
die? How are they going to die?
Yeah.
What's going to happen? And then it happened, and now I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah.
So in a weird way, it's like, okay, that
A
is,
burden is lifted.
I'm that worry is gone. I mean, I still worry about my mom, especially now that COVID is happening,
Of course. Of course.
but it makes, but now I know that I can survive it and that there are positives to it. And so I hope, I mean, my relationship with my mom is different than with my dad, but I hope that I can go into it with a little more understanding of what it feels like to lose someone you love. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that is one.
And that's a heavy one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably like the most obvious, profound one in the last few years. Other than that, like there hasn't really been like a moment that I can think of, except, you know, meeting my husband was a great moment that changed things. But like I think about music and how I started in music and how I got out of music. And I think about it a lot because I played music for a long time, and it was always, you know, what I thought I was going to do forever.
Mm-hmm.
I thought like I was going to be a successful musician and be able to live off of the music that I made and have a life for myself. And I moved from Brooklyn to LA in 2013. And I kind of think that things already were starting to change and turn for me, and that was like part of my like fight against it. I've always had moments over my music career where I'm like, I can't do this anymore, it's too hard and blah blah blah. But I've always like been mournful in those moments because I felt like it was like this thing that I loved so much still, and like how can I live without it kind of thing. But it started to turn into something where it didn't feel good anymore, you know? Like it didn't feel like it was doing for me what it used to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a big advocate of, if something doesn't feel good anymore, don't do it, you know?
Sure.
And I still love music, and I still like love and admire my friends who play music. And sometimes I think like about like what if things were different, but I really don't feel that pull. And I feel like I was waiting to feel it again. And so I kept pushing myself, and I wasn't feeling it, and I still haven't. And sometimes I'll pick up the guitar and play, and sometimes I'll try to write and everything, but it's just not there in the same way. And so a lot of times I often think like, what did I get from music and what changed? And honestly, I think like a major thing was performing. I think I'm a pretty good performer. And I think that I loved getting the feedback, the positive feedback that
Mm-hmm.
like I was good at what I was doing. And it
Sure.
made me feel special. And I liked feeling special. And then I think I got to a point in my life where I realized like I don't need like a million people to think that I'm special. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I have the people that I love around me that think I'm special, and I don't need anything more than that. And so once I felt like I didn't need that anymore, I think I just didn't feel the pull to it anymore. So
Claro.
then it makes me question, like, well, that sucks. Like, was music just an ego thing the whole time, or was there like a deeper connection there? And I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, so that's one. And then a third one. Um, oh man. Okay, ask the question again so I can reframe it in my head.
So it's basically, the three experiences of cathartic nature,
Right,
like it says there. It's
right,
just that you feel that whether you realize it or not when it was happening, you figure, this thing that happened to me or this process or season it
right,
definitely it formed parts of the person who I am today.
right.
It could be add-ons. It could be
Yeah,
removing things from
yeah.
your life.
I I feel like I'm doing more recent things, but maybe that I feel my 30s, I'm 37 as well, has been a transformative time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so for me, I've been struggling with infertility for the last 4+ years. And there's no, they call it unexplained because there's no reason. All of my tests are normal, everything is normal. And I grew up I never thought I wouldn't be a mother. I always thought like I was going to have a baby, I was going to have a house, I was going to have, all the things that people have that and especially with children, I think it's like an innate pull. And then it just wasn't happening and it wasn't happening and I could not do anything else but worry about it and focus on it and plan my life around it. And I kept putting things off and putting things off because I was like, well, but what if I have a baby? What if I have a baby? What if I get pregnant? I don't want to do this if I'm pregnant. I don't want to do this if I have a baby. What if I'm in the middle of school and I get pregnant and then I have to stop? Like, what a waste of money, blah, blah, blah. We even moved to Aaron's parents' house in Santa Cruz for a year. They had like this apartment downstairs. Oh, I got something in my eye. And like one of the main reasons was because like, okay, hopefully I'll have a baby while I'm here. And then we have help with the baby and, because the grandparents are right here. And then I can like move on. And that was kind of earlier in the experience of infertility. I think we'd been trying for a little less than a year by the time we moved there, but I already knew that like something was up. And so that's been a whole thing of just, it's something that I'm still dealing with, accepting that life isn't always how you think it's going to be. And then like, so then what is it? What is my life now that it's not what I expected it to be? It's kind of scary, So that's when I decided to go back to school, after my dad died and after I was like done with like putting things off because of the baby. I decided to go back to school, and that's been a really positive outcome of all of this, but I wish I had done it sooner. But I don't think I could have. I think I had to go through what I needed to go through, in order to get there.
I hear your story, like when you mentioned about the music, could music have just been an ego thing?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it is just me obviously coming into giving my intake of it. It doesn't it doesn't have to come as a patent as to like that's how it is. But I mean, in life we kind of have the ego in everything. I mean, I think it doesn't it could be it's I mean, because we're never gonna stop being us. We're never gonna stop. We're never gonna stop. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, I mean, let's say even if it's a quote unquote ego thing,
Mm-hmm.
it's completely legitimate. It's completely legitimate in it as much as it's part of the navigating. It's part of the navigating, and because I don't think how does, speaking about music, how does one do music adequately? How does that happen? How does one do, what is the, I'm not suggesting that there are people that are doing things in ways that are just pure toxic,
Yeah.
but how does one, like, do you, I don't know, do you join World Vision and then like do music like, I don't mean to put down anyone who does that, but I mean, it's, you would have probably not navigated through, and I'm not explicating this as though you are like self-loathing. That's not what I'm trying to suggest. But in response to that particular thing you said, could it be an ego thing? Yeah, it could have been a complete ego thing, and that's great.
Yeah.
and that's fantastic.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. And there isn't one like wrong or right way of doing it. I think for me, a since it was attached to my ego, I got jealous so easily, of people who were doing things more successful, like getting
Mm-hmm.
better gigs, getting
Mm.
commercial licenses,
Mm.
whatever, making money
Yeah.
from it. Um,
Mm.
and it just like made me it dictated my worth and my specialness.
Yeah. I see
And
now.
I didn't like how I felt, and I didn't like, this is extreme to say it like this, but I didn't like who I was. I didn't like those
Mm-hmm.
parts of me that
Mm-hmm.
it brought out. Um, and since I've like kind of let that go,
Yeah.
I'm way more able to like be happy for
Mm-hmm.
people and their successes, and it feels a lot better,
Yeah.
rather than being like, why isn't it me that's doing that stuff? Why aren't they looking at me?
Hmm.
What's wrong with me? You know?
There's so many there's so many areas. Like for you was perhaps music, for me it's other things, of seeking maybe that protagonism, or seeking, just seeking that acknowledgement, that could turn into kind of a slavery, kind of a codependency on that, kind of like that drug, that fix, to have others people's feedback
Yes.
be kind of like your self-worth. And yeah, and in that sense, I can understand it more now, how that needed to be removed from your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
It makes far more clear sense now. And
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear it. I'm also happy to hear you say it so honestly and so frankly. You're the part of your dad's story is that your dad is originally from Iran, no, from Iran.
Yeah.
um I don't know if it is, if I mean, as much as you're comfortable sharing, how much do you know about your dad's story? What is your dad's story like? Like, did he grow up in Iran? And if it did, I'm assuming very different times than Iran now.
Yeah.
How much do you know about your dad's story? Pre you coming into the world, maybe pre him meeting his partner, your mom. Like,
Yeah.
what do you know about that story, and then that led to migrating to outside of Iran? I don't know if it was immediately to the U.S., or how much do you know of it, and if you could share a little bit about it.
Um, it's funny because I feel like I know a lot, and I also feel like there's so much I don't know. My dad
Mm,
led a very interesting life, and in general, like that side of the family is there's a lot of crazy stories. But he was born and raised in Iran, and he was the middle child of about 12 kids, and middle-ish, one of the middle children. And he grew up in like a kind of a well-to-do Iranian family for the time. They had quite a bit of money. They had a house that was on this street called Jaleh, and it was called like the House of Jaleh, and it was like this big house, and they had like people, like multiple nannies, and they had like butlers and servants and stuff like that. It's crazy shit. But my dad was kind of like the black sheep of the family, and he didn't really get along with his dad very much or very well. And he like, I think to this day, I could be wrong, but you have to go at a certain age into the army if you're a guy. And he was having to go into the army, and he kept escaping. And I heard one story where like he like jumped over the wall, and when he got over the wall, there he was like surrounded by people with guns pointed at him because he was trying to escape.
wow.
And eventually his dad, I think, paid for him to get out of the army. And then he moved to the US when he was like 20 or 21, so he was pretty young when he came here. And wanted to be an actor, and he has like all these really cool, like early 70s headshots where he's got like these really long sideburns and like smoking a cigarette with a big collar and everything. Um,
So he
and
arrived in the U.S. around the 70s, like early 70s, or?
early
Hmm.
70s. Um, and he went to New York. So he lived in New York and he worked at like different restaurants. I think he was like a delivery boy. He did like all kinds of weird shit. And he continued to do all kinds of weird shit in different ways throughout his life. But he ended up meeting my mom at this bar called West End Bar or West End Grill or something, which is in the Upper West Side. And her story is a whole other thing. Basically, her family disowned her for marrying my dad because he's Iranian.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was like into drugs and everything. And so they ended up moving to Iran. And my sister was born in 75 in New York, and they moved when she was like couple weeks old, like baby, to Iran, and lived there for several years until 79 when the revolution happened. And then they came back during the revolution and stayed for the most part. And when they came back, my dad was doing all these drugs and everything in New York, and my mom wanted to get him out of there. So that's why they moved to Drescher.
To Pennsylvania, yeah.
Yes. And stayed there for
change.
a very long time. And then I was born. And then we actually moved back to Iran when I was in 5th grade for a few months, but then we moved back because it was just too different at that point.
So yeah, this is like 1994, maybe 1995, perhaps. 1993, 1994.
94, yeah. And yeah, so and then we kind of just stayed here, and he would go back to Iran every summer, and we would go from when I was 8 until I was like 16. We would go every other summer, and then but he would continue to go every summer until like he couldn't go anymore when he was sick. And then when he died, we shipped him over there, and he's buried there alongside his family. So
do you have, you mentioned when you were in 5th grade, was that the first time that you saw Iran, or?
No, that was the second or third time I'd been there.
But it was the first time that you were, quote unquote, living there for a prolonged amount of time.
Yeah.
What memories do you have? I mean, just maybe iconic things. Maybe, like how sometimes we remember smells, remember textures. What memories come to your head in that time, especially in contrast to your experience of the U.S. Early 90s?
It's funny. I don't know if it's because it was like a shorter period of being there than it was in the U.S., but I have so many memories of being in Iran, like from when I lived there, from when I visited there. I mean, I remember where we live. I remember the smells. I remember the taste. The food is delicious. I mean, I still eat the food. It's a very different world, but beautiful, and I love it. The school I went to was an all-girls, like international school. So there was, of course, it's all girls because all schools are separated by sex, by gender.
And it was in its own local language. It wasn't in English or anything.
It was a mix because it was international. So teaching Farsi, but also teaching in English. But it was like I think it was a government-run school, and so there was this one time I remember going to school, and like they brought us all outside, and they started to yell "Marg Barg America," which means "Down with America."
Yeah.
And then they were going to like burn a picture of Lincoln or something.
Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, and I'm like looking around me, and I'm like, "What the fuck is happening?" And I was like 10 years old. I had just moved from the U.S. And I started to cry, and like an older student took me and like brought me up to the front. They're like, "Look what you're doing. You're making her cry and you're upsetting people. Stop doing this, blah, blah, blah."
Yeah.
And I remember they stopped it, and they sent everybody away, and they brought me inside, and they were talking to me, and they're like, "We're saying down with the bad people, not everybody in America." And I was like, what the fuck is going on here? You know? With that
It's a
being
lot to
said,
take.
that was a government school. Like a lot of schools are
Mm-hmm.
government schools, and so the government there is crazy, and it was really intense. But like Iranians love Americans, and they love talk like they think it's just so interesting to talk to people from different
Yeah.
countries, but like especially Americans. And I was nobody's ever mean to me because I'm half American or came from America or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Do
but
you
so
do you
that's a
rec-
memory.
do you
Yeah.
recall specifically in that same question any
Mhm.
particular memories where you felt different even though you are part Iranian? Like, did you ever have a other than that moment where you're particularly crying, any other instances where you
Yeah.
felt out of place? And I guess that goes into, I also want to ask, did you unwillingly
Yeah.
go? Did you feel like you wanted to go? Did you feel like you wanted to leave in the US? Usually people don't because you leave your friends, but how was kind of like
Yeah.
that experience of like, did you maybe resent your parents for leaving, or how were you handling that? And then once you're there, did you feel different, or have experiences where you
Yeah.
might have felt different?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't remember resenting my parents. I was definitely really sad to leave my friends.
Hmm.
And but I was also I love my family and I was so excited to live with them too. So I think it was a little bit it was just bittersweet, you know? And I met like I remember going to school and like meeting really wonderful people and like having great friends there too. And like when I moved back to the US just a few months later, they like made a whole packet for me of people saying, "We'll miss you" and stuff. It was really sweet. Um, so I don't think I resented them, and I do think it was bittersweet in terms of feeling like I was different. I yes, I did. I mean, I didn't know the language as well, although I knew it enough to get around. You know,
Hmm.
as a 10-year-old, how much you're getting around as a 10-year-old, I don't know. But I also like the friends I had were also international students. So some of them were came from America. One of them was like came from France. So I was like had a relationship with these Iranians that were also either from another like living in another country and then moved there, or like half American, half whatever. Like
Hmm.
I so that was helpful. But I feel like it's interesting you asked that because I feel like in general as somebody who's half Iranian and half, you know, Eastern European, basically. Uh,
Hmm.
I always feel like I don't fit in completely anyway.
Mm. I was about to ask that. Yeah.
Yeah. So like my Iranian family, they don't treat me any differently than like
You're not enough Iranian to be there, and then you're not enough quote unquote American
yeah,
to kind of a little bit of, maybe a little bit of both ends.
exactly. But like the Iranian side is more that I put on myself. They treat me like I'm 100% Iranian.
Hmm.
I'm their family just as and I have other members of my family that are like half German, half Iranian, half British, half Iranian, and they are like more Iranian than I am. I feel like because they have spent more time there. Like my
Hmm.
cousins that are half British. Well, they're like their mom was British, but a lot of them were born in the U.S. actually. Um, but they live in Iran, and they are like I don't think they ever think of themselves as anything other than Iranian. You know.
No.
Whereas I, because my mom's side was kind of non-existent, uh, I just had my Iranian family. So I never really fully felt accepted from my mom's side, even though I did see my grandfather. I never saw my grandmother. Um,
And on your mom's side, they resided in the United States.
yes, they are
Okay.
from like multiple generations of New York City.
Okay.
Um, and so I always felt more Iranian, but I also like was born and raised in the US, you know? So family wise, I felt more Iranian. and house-wise, I felt more Iranian, but also living in the US. So it's just like a weird, I never feel like I'm an all-American girl at all. But I also
Mm,
don't feel like I'm a full-on Persian girl either.
vale.
I feel like a lot of my um, identity is more with my Iranian side than my American side. It's complicated, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's if people have that honest reflection, it's gonna. I think it's gonna always be complicated, complicated not with a negative connotation, but in the sense that it isn't binary. It isn't
Mhm.
straightforward. It is just zigzags all over,
Yeah.
and that's kind of. I mean, we look at it, it's kind of beautiful in its own way because it comments as to the sabotaging essence of when one feels one's life has to be linear or one has to pursue things linearly or it problematizes that it contests it
Yeah.
and it just shows you no it's this mixing and hybrid
Yeah.
and back and forth and that's completely fine and
Yeah.
it's kind of natural to
It
be
is.
that. I'm curious, in when you started getting into music,
Mhm.
um, and also now that you've kind of stepped out of that realm with the sense of living in the United States and the narratives or the sense of identity is so uh,
Yeah.
it's so evident. It's a conversation. It's a
Yeah.
conversation that's always going on. Music, music and identity. I mean, keep those two in your mind.
Yes.
Music and identity. In your voyage as a musician, did that ever play a role? Music and identity, music and cultural identity. Did that ever play a role in terms of perhaps the influences that you were having in that moment or in those moments in your life, in plural? Curious if it played if maybe if it played a conscientious role whilst you were kind of navigating the music doing
Mhm.
gigs and stuff and feeding yourself with different musicians different arts, was that playing a role that you were maybe aware of while you were navigating that realm, and if
My
it did, kind of share a little bit about perhaps that.
my Persian side, like that part.
Maybe just in general, just identity, the fact that uh like hearing other musicians like
Right.
that are expressing in their song, whether it be instrumentally, whether it be lyrically,
Mhm.
um, contents that point to kind of a perhaps maybe a subaltern experience to the
I see what you're saying.
status quo experience in the U.S.
Yeah.
and interpret as you may, and then
Yeah.
answer it, and then I'll see if it's what I'm asking. But
Um, I don't know. If I had to say, I would think that if that were happening, it would be more of an unconscious thing, um, not not something that I picked up on.
so
Um,
maybe in the question I can maybe add to it, maybe
mhm.
in hindsight, as you maybe
Okay.
kind of dig into that, and also post music as
Right.
you kind of imagine or reimagine yourself in the not music world now, but maybe reflections that you have made, or adding to that question, the artists that you're listening to now that you're plugging into, what is that experience now? Maybe you can maybe you can answer more in that line of to,
Right.
as a non-musician now. Let's rephrase the question. As a non-musician now, what might you say are contrasting influences you have now as a non-musician than when you were a musician? Do you find a contrast? If you stop now and think about it, where you were, the trees that you were feeding off? Do you find
Right.
them differently?
Um, you know, I don't know if this answers your question, but I want to say this because I think in general, as as I've moved kind of past the music world, I've been focusing. I've been somehow like I am way more mindful of things um, and like nature and the beauty around me and um, appreciative of those things and of certain things in music than I was when I was a musician. And I think that's because my ego was in the way.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it was too much like, well, will people like what I'm writing and listening to music and judging it against like what I can do and what they can do? And am I jealous of this song or could I do better than this song? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so now it's more expanded um, because I've just slowed down and have become, with a lot of work and still work to do, a more patient person. Um, I still am impatient sometimes. I'm saying that because I know my husband's in the other room. um, but I have become a lot more patient and a lot more perceptive
Mm-hmm.
in general.
Of your impatience.
Of my impatience of
Mm-hmm.
everything, of like,
Mm-hmm.
um, walking down the street and looking at things, like being outside of my head a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes
Like
sense.
more peripheral,
Yeah, rather
widening.
inner, but inner in a bad way, not
Mm-hmm.
like a meditative way. It was inner in a like a not seeing things clearly,
Mm-hmm.
just being more like too focused on what was wrong in
Mm-hmm.
with things. Does that make sense?
Does that make sense? It does. It does make some sense. I guess the when one tends to, and I say when one like in third person, but
Yeah.
when I tend to overly focus on myself, or which happens quite often, hence the attempting the mindfulness
Yeah.
practices. Yeah, yeah, things can get a little bit twisted. And those moments I try to remember to have and practice a little bit of grace, of course, to know that, yeah, yeah, you fuck up, you make mistakes and stuff like that, and then to continue the practice of trying to see what's going on. And as of late, with so many things going on, I don't think the radar of self-care is ever going to be turned off, because you have to take care of yourself. But there's also the radar of self-ego. I think that never goes off either. I think it's just
Mhm.
that this balancing act of self-care and self-ego that once has to kind of like walk and try to balance the both. I think they kind of both have to exist together, the ego and the self-care. But what I was going to say, with everything that's going on,
Mhm.
it does bring the opportunity of far more self-reflection, to see like, wow, there's so many privileges I have.
Mhm.
And but also, I think it moves me
Mhm.
to want to problematize. um and it maybe I've always been a little bit of a rebel,
Yeah.
but I think that if we look at societal change, and maybe I'm shifting off a little bit of topic, but it's okay. It's just, it happens in this space.
Yeah.
Um, the 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 changes, the societal changes, when we look at history, I think we tend to glamorize experiences as though they are kind of like fictional movies. So we talk about MLK, we talk about Malcolm X, we talk about different revolutions, and I think we have historicize them so much that they become almost like untouched.
Stories.
Yeah, stories, untouchable, plaqued up, framed up references that are completely unrelated and have nothing to do with the current context we're in. Because, and
Mm-hmm.
I say this because as soon as, and I've lived a little bit of this, with the school, with some stuff I've been problematizing, but you start doing, especially when you do it within the suburbs and stuff, and everyone's just well accommodated. You don't question things. I don't seek to play myself as some hero, but what I've noticed when you start to problematize things, the excuses come up. Oh, well, it's not the time. It's not the time. It's not the place.
Mm-hmm.
Gaslighting happens.
Mm-hmm.
Subtle, very subtle, very, very, very subtle, very subtle. And yesterday I was talking to my sister-in-law, and I'll close my parenthesis really soon. And I was sharing with my sister-in-law this experience I had with some group of friends back in Puerto Rico about a few years ago. There was a big mobilization in Puerto Rico where the right-wing part of the evangelical sector was mobilizing for part of the very few things they mobilize about to go against stuff that has to do with the LGBT community. So they were
Mm-hmm.
mobilizing in massive. I don't think there's ever been a gathering of there's like hundreds of thousands of people went to the big Capitol building because there was this I can't remember, but there was this legislation that would grant rights to the LGBT, that would grant protections that we all have, but they were not covered.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this huge mobilization. So me and a group of friends went. At that time, I was still Christian, and we went and we felt we needed to problematize this. So we made this huge banner and everything, and we went right to the middle of the thing, right in front of the stage. So I had a friend like maybe 6, 7, 8 feet away from me, and I was like on the other side. We had big poles, and we lifted this big banner, and the banner was just problematizing the whole thing. It was basically saying, we're not in the Christian Republic of Puerto Rico. This is a plural nation. We're, basically in that problematizing that. And then we had some slogans. I can't remember what they were, but they were very clear that we're not alongside
Yeah.
them. So then people, as soon as we lifted the banner, the guy who was in the front started saying in a very nice way, very subtle. He's like, those people with the banner, could you bring that banner down because you're blocking the camera, and I felt bad, and I was telling my friend, let's bring it down a little bit. And to close the story, I'm not gonna bring down banners anymore.
Yeah.
I'm not. I feel like I'm not going to bring down banners anymore because it tends to happen that they're not going to come out. They're not going to come out with little horns and a devil's tail saying, "Hey, I'm here to challenge." They're going to come out, kind of like patting you in the back, like, "Hey, buddy, hey, but." And this is my experience has been, my
Mm-hmm.
school problematizing the staff there. They come like that, and I'm like, enough. I'm not going to bring down the banner.
Mm-hmm.
Screw it. It's covering your camera. Okay,
Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah.
Closing the parenthesis. Anyways, um, you've had experiences of inner migrations, let's say, moving from different parts of the US. And in the
Mm-hmm.
US, there's like different countries inside the country.
Mm-hmm.
Every part has its own thing. What would you think? What do you think? Imagine yourself maybe as a visual Velcro. What things do you think have become attached to you, or that you have allowed to become attached to you in a learning in a learning tandem, in a learning curve that you embrace and you keep along every one of these moves you've made through the United States? What things do you think you have learned in each one of these moves that you've made? How have you made yourself available or able, whether conscious or unconscious, to learn things? It could be hindsight. Holy shit.
Yeah.
I look at it now and it's so yeah, what have you learned in your travels within, and I'm just saying within the US. I'm not saying outside going to Iran,
Great.
but just within the US. What do you think are things that you have learned in your migrations, in your travels?
Well, definitely that, like, as not only have I lived in different cities, but I've also like been to many different parts of the country just touring and stuff. And I would say more so than even just living in different cities, going to these other places, like Georgia and uh, place in Kansas. I'm just trying to think of places like where you normally would find people who think differently than I do. There's a lot
Hmm.
of people who don't think differently than I do. There are a lot of people who are like, fighting the good fight in these redder areas. They're
And
just,
if you have stories in particular, feel free to share. I love hearing stories or anecdotes.
I think an overall takeaway, and I'll include some stories in this, is that, and it goes along with living in different cities too. And I think the core of it all is the people that I've met, in New York, in LA, in Santa Cruz, in Portland, where I grew up, where we grew up a little bit together. And then everywhere in between, it just really, like, when you are able to go to different places and have conversations with people, um, it really humanizes the world, and it really like makes you realize that it just, that other people have their own lives and have their own issues and everything, but um it's just crazy when you go to like a small town. Like, I remember here's a little story. I went to Missoula, Montana, which isn't a small town, but compared to the places I've lived, it's small.
Hmm.
um Beautiful. Montana is so beautiful. And I usually stayed with either a friend or like a friend of a friend. I rarely had to stay in a hotel. So I was meeting people that I didn't know like all the time and then staying in their homes. And so I remember going to Missoula and I met this couple, and they a friend of theirs had just died in a car accident like that day from
Oh
like the
wow.
restaurant they worked with. And I was
Mm.
like, oh my God, like I can totally find somewhere else. I never even met them. I
Yeah.
was like, I can totally find somewhere else to stay. And they were like, no, it'll be a good distraction for us. And then like I went there and we just sat outside and smoked pot and drank beer, and the sun set like at like 10 o'clock at night, which was like blowing my mind. And they were like talking about their friend, and we were just talking about our lives. And I don't know, like it's moments like that that just kind of
Hmm.
stick out to me for some reason. Just everybody has a story, you know. Um,
We all
yeah,
do. That and if only we had the chance to tell those stories more often to each other.
yeah,
To and when I say that having a chance, I don't mean like the opportunities are not there, but if we gave each other the chance, if we gave each other the chance to do that, and I know some people are trying to do that quite intriguingly and intentionally with people in the quote unquote other side, and trying.
yes,
I remember these conversations that I guess more in the public eye that Van Jones was doing, Van Jones
mm-hmm.
from CNN,
Mm-hmm.
with people that had voted for Trump, and then he was
Mm-hmm.
trying to start these conversations, and I think that would be phenomenal if that could occur more.
Yeah,
And because I theorize that that doesn't occur as much
yeah,
because the media is obviously fanning a fire on both ends,
yes,
and it doesn't allow for when we have one end and the other caricaturizing the other, it's if there is ever a point where they sit at the table,
Yeah.
it's going to be a pseudo conversation. It's not because we're not knowing each other.
Yeah, I agree. And I think um, the issue with that, along with like the media, is I am guilty of this.
Oh,
It feels
me
very
too.
black and white,
Me
right?
too.
It's like you're wrong and I'm right kind of
Hmm.
thing. And they are thinking the same thing. So, A, it's not black and white. Nothing is, and I have to remind myself of that often in the case of like Trump supporters. And B, I think they are listening to lies.
Hmm. Claro.
And it's the combination of seeing things in black and white and being like, you're a crazy liberal person, whatever they think is wrong with us. And then also believing things that aren't in their best interest,
Yeah, yeah.
you know?
Which
So
seems contradictory, but
it does seem contradictory. And I feel like, yeah, I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but whatever you
it
said
does. It does.
made me kind of think about that and how, yeah, I mean, there's so many people who are middle ground. There are people who are liberals who maybe more extreme, although I don't know how, I don't know what our version of like the KKK would be.
Well, let me make a little asterisk of an intervention here. I'm not. It's like, let me give this example. When MLK was, there's this interview he did, and then he was. I'm sure he was asked numerous of times, but I'm reminded of this one interview he did, and then the guy interviewing, the person interviewing him was sharing with him some of Malcolm X's thoughts about him, that he was being a bit of an Uncle Tom and an enabler. This was back Malcolm X early
Yeah.
on. Later on, he changed some of his precepts. But in that time, he was saying that MLK was a bit of an Uncle Tom, and and an enabler, and basically this whole idea of putting the other cheek. And then and Martin says when I talk about love, I'm not talking about this. And I'm going to paraphrase him.
Mhm.
This mushy gushy thing. I'm not talking about this feeling. I'm talking about the determination that moves ourselves towards social justice.
Mhm.
And so then when now I'll use it, I'll use that as a bit of a catapult to this. I'm going to say, when I talk about having these moments of intersection, I don't mean to suggest, let's talk in a vacuum, and let's bring Donald Trump here and have a nice and have
Yeah, yeah,
bring him to this space, bring him to this space, and ask him the same questions I ask you,
yeah,
and and we can have that conversation. But we're not in a vacuum. There's a context. So there's problematization needs to happen. Things needs to be problematized. So if someone, it's as clear as you said it, if someone is saying lies, you need to problematize those lies, and also you just
yeah.
need to problematize those lies. It doesn't have to be about, hey, you're stupid, you're an idiot. Let's problematize these lies, because
Right.
I think most of it is about we become protagonistic, mutually protagonistic.
Yeah,
So offended. I'm so
yeah,
offended. But so if we talk about the topics, and when we, at least we try to orchestrate the conversation as
yeah,
a conversation and not as a, hey, I'm here to attack you. So when I say have in moments of intersection, it is just purely like for example in social media, how are we talking to each other? Is it like, hey, I beat you? Or is it, hey, do we fill our interactions with a lot of periods or a lot of exclamation marks? Or do
mhm,
we put more question marks? I think we need
mhm,
to put more question marks to see where things are coming out.
yeah,
Not to think we need to water things down
yeah,
to not make the other person feel uncomfortable. We need to have uncomfortable conversations.
yeah, yeah. I agree, and I think. I'm so triggered by Trump supporters right now that
Yes, I am too.
it would be really hard for me to have a civil conversation, like a civil, not like a civil conversation with a Trump supporter, like, hey, how's the weather? You know,
Yeah,
that's,
a
but like
real conversation.
what's going on. And even like we'll be driving down. The other day we drove to the beach, and like this guy was on the side of the road with a big pickup truck, and like just covered in Trump flags, just side of the road. He set up a chair and was like
This is
asleep in the chair just next to the truck. And I was like, my
advertising.
heart starts pumping. I wanted to, I was like about to roll the window down and be like, fuck you, you know, like
Yeah,
it just, it makes me angry. And
rightfully.
and to be fair, like you're not going to have a civil conversation with that guy, right?
It's unlikely. Yeah, it's unlikely.
But you know, we tried to, like, Aaron's grandparent, not parents, his grandparents are Trump supporters, and we've tried to have civil conversations with them about things. You know, they are sweet people who watch Fox News.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, we're not going to change their mind, I don't think. But they post a lot of dumb shit, and it hurts my heart because I'm Iranian and I'm, you know, a daughter of an immigrant, and amongst so many other topics that are just so, to me, clear that are wrong about Trump. Um, to support somebody who's like having like a Muslim ban and making it so that hard for Iranians to come into the country, and making it hard for Iranians in general, you know, like it's just like it's hard for me to pretend like everything's okay when I'm around them. And in fact, we were there this past Christmas, and we went to their house. It wasn't on Christmas, but it was like soon after. And I was feeling really sad about my dad not being around, even though like we never celebrated Christmas. But I just slept. I like went in the like office area and like laid down. Like I didn't physically have the energy to just like pretend that like I'm okay with what their beliefs are,
Yeah.
you know?
Do you recall any, or what is the closest thing to a conversation that you guys have maybe had with perhaps your partner's grandparents that you reckon could be used as a point of reference of hope?
Well, you know, his mom started an email chain um, kind of when the newer dialogue of racial equality came into play recently. Um,
You mean post George Floyd?
Post George Floyd, and it was a great email, like really thought out, provided a lot of references of like things to watch and read, and like, you know, taking accountability for her own work, our own work that we need to do, um, just to try to get like some kind of conversation going. And I don't know. I mean, they emailed back and they were like, you know, his grandmother was like, I had a friend that was Black in the 60s. And like, okay, that doesn't mean you're not racist now. And then it was like, and his grandfather was like, I'm a good person. And it was a little defensiveness, but also like there said it with kindness, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I shared stories of my like of things that have happened to me, you know, as not a Black person, but as a mixed person, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to walk down the street and pass, you know, like people don't know I'm Persian. But I've had instances where other white people would never have had those experiences,
Yeah.
or white people, period. So I keep hearing,
Do you think that and this is not to diss your grand in-laws, but do you feel like on paper they might have not approved of you as if they had a choice, and then come close to you, then they realize like, yeah, she's just a regular old girl, you
well,
know?
that's a good question. I don't think they knew much about me before they met me. Um, I should ask my husband. Uh, I know.
I guess this is just from your
Yeah,
experience,
I
definitely,
met his
just from experience.
grandfather on his dad's side. Um, Shortly after we started dating, like we were dating for 3 months, and suddenly I was like at his Mother's Day brunch with like his entire family, and so he was lovely to me, and I even like went to his house, and he had friends there, and they were I get this a lot. They were so fascinated that I was Persian, and they were like, "Oh, I've heard like I bet it's a beautiful country." I think had they been there years ago or something, one of them. But then they're also like Republicans and blah blah blah, and so there's always that mix. But anyway, I don't know. I feel like maybe his.
Or have you ever gotten the feedback of like, like in The Office, when Michael, because I know you mentioned you watched The Office, that's why I'm using this reference. When Michael asked Oscar if there's a less offensive term than Mexican, we laugh within the span that that's a comedy. But
Right.
do you think that there's that maybe like that from not in that cartoonish kind of way, but as in like, I didn't know you were like not white, or like as in like not directly maybe a mention, but maybe in your experience, not necessarily just with them, but have you ever
Yeah.
perhaps had that experience with people saying, how some people open their mouth and just the ignorant thing comes out, and
Right.
they mean well with it,
Right.
like like I didn't know you were half a human, kind of like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You seem normal.
I mean, I've definitely had some experiences. For the most part, like I know, like a lot of people don't know a lot about Iran, and so I don't see like their questions. I feel like their questions are pretty harmless, and if anything, like I want them to ask me questions.
Mm-hmm. Claro,
I'm not
claro.
an expert at all, but like one time I remember something crazy. I was in LA, and somebody was asking about like Iranians or something, and they're like, "Well, Persians are." They were like, I was told if you're Persian, it means you're Jewish, but if you're Iranian, then
A
a,
Muslim.
you're not Jewish. And I was
Okay,
like,
okay.
who the fuck told you that? Persian and Iranian are the same thing, you know,
Yeah,
but not everybody knows that.
and then
And
they
not
go
everybody
talking.
knows what the language is called. And they say, like, do you call it Iranian? And it's like, well, I guess you can call it that, but it's Persian, it's Farsi, I just
Mm-hmm.
looked it up myself. It's Farsi, it's not Persian, but you can say Persian. Persian is right too.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And like you say, it's good to ask questions. It's
yeah,
good. It's definitely good to ask questions, even if you might
yeah,
think these are stupid questions. Why not? There's openness to it.
yeah,
In that question, I was kind of lining up in the realm of the people being well intended, not people being malevolent, but in the well
right.
intended, and then just saying stuff that just you really like that is a little bit offensive. But you probably don't even know.
But then I've
Um,
also had people who were like straight up offensive and
mm,
prejudiced as well, including a teacher in high school. So
what did the teacher? I mean, if you are
yeah,
cool with
no,
sharing.
I don't mind sharing. I think he actually still works there.
And this was in Pennsylvania.
This was in Pennsylvania, in Upper Dublin. So it was history, and his name is Mr. Ames. I'll call him out. And he did this thing which was really obnoxious to begin with, which is like he would sit in the front of the class. I remember he would take his tie, he would like tuck it in. He'd always be like playing with his tie or something. And when you were going to respond to something, this is like just painting a picture. When you would respond to something, he would say like up love, and like he'd say that to everybody, and you'd have to stand up to answer. Like you're a high school kid. Like how embarrassing is that? How uncomfortable is that? Anyway, so there was one day where he was like talking about Iran for whatever reason, it was a history class. And he said something like Iranians and other terrorists like that.
Oh God.
Something along those lines. I don't remember the words word for word, but I remember being like, oh my God, did he just say that? And I like kind of looked around. Everybody knows I'm Iranian. And I looked around and they were like all looking at me like, that's weird, and I was like, did I just hear that? And they were like, no, he just said that. And so the next day there was a test. And on the back of the test, I wrote a very nice letter. I said, I don't know if you meant to say this, but I'm Iranian and you said that they're all terrorists and like, that's not true. And I just wanted to like point out that you said that because I don't think that, that's right or whatever. But I said it in a very like respectful, nice way.
Yeah.
So then I go home and I come in the next day and he's screaming at me. And he made me sit in front of his desk, in front of everybody. And he was screaming at me. And he was like, I lost sleep over this. I would never say such a thing about it. And I was crying. And he's like, good, I'm glad you're crying. Now you know how I felt. And I was like, oh my God, you're
how I
piece
felt
of shit.
How old were you there, Sami?
I was 16. And then in college, a guy called me a sand N-word.
A what?
A sand N-word.
Oh, like as in lighter? Like you're the lighter version of this? Is that what? Is
Have
that what?
you
Is that?
heard that before? It means like
I
you're.
never know.
I guess it means like a lighter version of it, but it's basically said about people from the Middle East.
Oh, because of the desert, like desert, the associations of the desert. That's the where that comes from.
Exactly. That's where the sand comes from.
Ay, 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 muchas cosas. Anyway, as we come to close, I would like to get to talk to you a little bit about you. You mentioned that you've been, you know, schooling yourself into a whole new realm of art,
Mhm.
of design and stuff. I'd like to hear a bit more about that chapter of your life that is
Yeah.
ongoing. How did that come about? How did you see that as a, how did you come to terms with it? Like, yes, this is what I'm going to do. Like,
Yeah.
can you know, piece that puzzle together? How did it come about? What was the first thing you might caught your attention and then feeling that you can do this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not schooling myself. I'm in school for it. So there
Sí,
are other
sí, perdón, disculpa, I'm
people.
sorry. You're going to school, let me rephrase, you're going to school to
Yeah.
prepare yourself in
Right.
that line of work. Gracias, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm in school for interior design, and it's been something that I've been attracted to like literally my whole life. I just never really thought of it as a career for myself, not thinking of it as a career. And then I've always thought about it in like the last 10 12 years. I've thought about like, well, maybe I could do interior design, but I've always been really intimidated by it for some reason. I don't know why. I think I could go on forever about like why, but I won't. I'll just say used to be impatient and now I'm trying to be more patient, and that with the patience takes like learning and humbleness and being like okay with starting at the bottom from something else, and I just kept putting that off, I think. um anyway, so yeah, I've always been attracted to it, and like I said, like we were trying to have a baby. We're not trying to have a baby, but I've put that aside,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I'm focusing more on just going to school. I think I'm attracted to it, A, because it's creative, and I'm always looking at nature and like seeing the colors in nature and what colors am I attracted to? How can I translate that into a space and home? I'm always wanting to make people feel like they're home and they're cozy and they're warm and they're welcome. And I just feel like what better way to do that than to help them design the spaces that they live in,
Mm-hmm.
or work in, or stay in, or experience. Like the places that we occupy are so important to how we feel. Like think about like if you live in a studio apartment with bars on the window and like barely any light coming in, that's gonna affect you. Um, and so, really, a lot of what I've been thinking about lately is how can I use these new skills that I'm developing and make it accessible for people who might not be able to afford like a high-end interior designer, so that everybody has a chance to like have a space that they feel comfortable in. I think that's so important, and especially right now when we're spending a lot of time
Mm.
indoors
Indoors.
at home.
Is there a, or at least um, maybe the spin that you give it, or within the school that you're in, are there classes or approaches that bring an ecological perspective in terms of ecological as far as visual, like seeking inspiration, but also in terms of sustainability?
Yes.
Are those things? Can you talk a little bit about those?
Actually, the program that I'm in, like sustainability is a huge like pillar of it.
Mm-hmm.
I In every class I've taken, they've talked about sustainability, and I'm actually taking a whole class about sustainability in this next term. And it's really cool because it actually has made me appreciate the value of. First of all, it's important to think about when you're building something or when you're designing a space, like where are you getting these things from? How much do they cost? How did they get here? You have to,
Mm.
it's a very mindful process of um, putting a space together, because you want to be mindful of the things that you're purchasing, right?
Mm-hmm.
At least I do. um, but anyway, so like thinking about sustainable materials, reusing materials, um, is exciting to me, whereas before I didn't ever really think about it. There's this place here called the Rebuilding Center that haven't been to in a long time, but they have everything like vintage tile, lighting, doors, wood floors, and everything is just donated to them.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And it's such a cool idea, and not only is it more sustainable, but it's also like everything has a story then. So I like that too. I think with sustainability, just um, it just makes you feel better about what you're doing. No?
Yeah, and I guess when you realize that things come from somewhere,
Yeah.
and it just seemed like a pretty obvious thing, but but the the awaring process is not there. I mean, sometimes I just get pissed at my family every time they bring out the plastic plates and stuff like that. And then mom
Yeah.
could be like, "Well, you could help me wash the dishes." I mean, there's also this is a good balancing,
Yeah.
problematizing each side. But sometimes I think we kind of feel like uh, things kind of just come from thin air. They
There's
come from thin air, and then they'll disappear, out of sight, out of mind. So you put them in the trash, and then it's like out of sight, out of mind. Someone else's problem.
yeah.
Um, and I'm sure people who live close by near trash dumps, like for example, people
Mhm.
in the Bronx and communities, that you can feel like New York is such an interesting place because it's such a great place to see the societal problems in a micro,
Mhm.
how the disparity the
Mhm.
disparity in such a very harsh, vivid way
Yeah.
between rich and disadvantaged,
Mhm.
rich and poor, out of sight for me, the privileged, but very present in sight for me, the
Yeah.
unprivileged. the
Yeah.
one who has to live the bad karma.
Yeah.
Um, speaking uh, to the realm of imagination, to the realm of rethinking things. I think of the word utopia, and I think of there's a saying that is attributed commonly. It's wrongly attributed, and it's sad that I don't know who the real person who actually said it is, but it's attributed wrong to Eduardo Galeano, who's a Latin American author. And there's this statement where I think there's in a classroom setting, and then they're talking about utopia. Seeing the utopia like in the horizon, and then you mobilizing towards it. You take 5 steps, and then the utopia take five more steps. You take 5 more steps, and it just so as you go towards it, it just keeps on getting further. It seems unattainable. So
Yeah.
then, the student asks, so then what then is the purpose of the utopia?
Yeah.
To press forward, to keep
Yeah.
on moving forward.
Yeah.
So what are your utopias,
Oh
Sami?
my
And
God.
we will close with that, and you'll have the last word. So what are your utopias in life? Is it utopias or utopias? I don't even know how to say it in
You could say utopia.
utopia. Okay.
I think like my personal utopia or like for the world.
Things that keep you moving forward. Things that keep you moving
Oh,
forward in that line,
yeah.
and also that hope, that aspiration for something better.
That's a good question because it's been really hard to find that right now.
Mm,
And I've been trying. It's a
I hear
little
you.
hard. It's a little hard. Utopia is a little cloudy right now. You know what I
I hear
mean?
you.
It's hard to see it. Um, I think just like as little as it is, as small as it seems right now, just like taking classes, focusing on learning something new, um, doing stuff, learning about gardening, which I've been doing, has been really fulfilling. And thinking about like, okay, maybe one day I'll have like a little farm.
Mm,
I can have like a big garden and like feed myself from and not have to like go to the supermarket for things, you know? So that's something that kind of keeps me going and feels like is a potential attainable goal in the future. Um, but other than that, I don't have a lot. I know that's depressing.
no, I think that's just very honest, and I think that speaks as to where we're in life.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I hope
Sammy,
something.
no, no, it's a bit overcast. It's a
Yeah.
bit cloudy, and I think that is pointing to an actual reality. So, Sammy, gracias. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been lovely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank your lovely partner for lending you for a little time, and your feline and your chicken friends also. I'm sure they're craving your attention. Um, oh God, you just this that's my sweet spot. My heart is melted.
You probably know
And for the world out there, just to inform the world out there that I am indeed Sammy's biggest fan.
that. You might have to
I
say,
have I have all of Sammy's records.
can I just make a quick note about that one that's on top right now?
Sure.
It was produced by this man named Felix McTeague, who I just found out passed away
Oh wow.
recently. And he was very young and he has a couple kids. And it's funny that you're holding that up because I've been thinking about him a lot. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So
Sorry.
no, 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 no. That's his space, Sorry about that. It's
Yeah.
art is beautiful, and I'm glad you got to partake of that with that person.
It's true. Yeah.
So gracias. Gracias. Also thank you, and gracias to everyone who partook, who watched here and there, passed by. This could be a bit of a drive-through interaction, and that's also part of it. That's fine. I
Yeah.
like to close with the words of Walter Mercado. It's actually a Puerto Rican astrologer. who
Ooh.
actually has a documentary out in
Oh,
Netflix.
yes.
Mucho, mucho amor. Have
Yeah.
you
I haven't seen it, but it looks fascinating.
watch it? Please watch it. So every segment of his, he would close, que tenga mucha paz, pero que tenga mucho, mucho, mucho amor. So people, much peace, much love. We'll see each other next time. Tertuliando en Cuarentena. Don't go anywhere, Sami.
Okay.
So, adios amigos, adios amigas. Ciao.